So tonight, I'm going to continue my Intro to Comic Craft tutorial, and I'm going to be working on some penciled comic pages. And to begin with, I'm going to demonstrate how I stretch watercolor pages. So to stretch watercolor paper, you're going to need a stretcher board, and this is just inexpensive corrugated plastic that's been cut down to be the right size for a 10-inch by 14-inch sheet of watercolor paper. You're going to need some blue low-tack masking tape. I like the 1.5-inch tape made by 3M. I've tried other blue tapes in the past. I find that this one works the best. You're going to want a selection of clips, 9 large bulldog clips, and about 3 large binder clips. And it also helps to have a spray bottle of water, although that's not necessary. You will need some paper towels, a mop brush, and a cup of clean water. So we're gonna start by flipping the page over and saturating the back with water. This is a new spray bottle, so I have to get it activated. Or it says it will never spray. That's fine. Spraying isn't necessary. It just makes it a lot easier. So you're gonna dip your mop brush into the water and apply a liberal amount to the back of your watercolor paper. And I do my comic pages on Mont Ball 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. This is a cellulose-based watercolor paper, which doesn't make it good for traditional watercolors, but it is able to hold the sort of detail I want for watercolor. So once you've got the back saturated, you're gonna take your paper towel roll, and you're pretty much just going to roll it across the back to soak up the extra water. Then you're gonna flip it over. I actually have some non-photo blue that escaped from the front, so I wanna wipe that off. Flip it over, position it on your gator board, and saturate the front. And the first layer of saturation you're going to do is just to activate that non-photo blue from the inkjet printer so we can pick that up again, because we don't want that. And that's a water-based ink, so adding water will reactivate the ink. Soak that up, and then we're going to saturate it again, and this time it's intended to help stretch the paper. And if you don't own any spray bottles, a quick trip to your Walmart or Dollar Tree will supply you with all the water bottles you really need. You don't need to buy the ones that are labeled for like crafts, because it doesn't matter. All right, so my page is saturated, and I know it's hard for you guys to see that, so you have to take my word for it. With some fresh paper towel, I'm gonna go ahead and dry this off. And you don't need it to be bone dry, you just need it to be not sopping wet. Now, we're gonna take that blue painter's tape and we're going to pull off a length. And you don't want it to be super tacky, so one of the tips I found is you stick it against your arm so those dead skin cells make it less tacky. Because if it's too tacky, it'll rip up the paper surface when you remove it. Oh shoot, I goofed. Too distracted tonight. So if you mess up, it's really easy to remove your painter's tape, especially while the paper is still wet. What you want to do, let's do this again, because one of the important steps is actually you want to moisten the front side of your painter's tape. And it's important to use a crepe paper style painter's tape rather than the foam ones. The ones that are designed not to tear when you rip them off from the walls will not work for this. Line it up with your straight edge on your comic page. squeegee off the excess water and then use those binder clips to secure the edges while it dries. And you're gonna wanna do this for all 4 sides. And you're gonna use bulldog clips to secure the edges that are further away from the edge of the corrugated plastic. And there are other ways to stretch watercolor papers. This is just the way that really works best for how I work. Now, if you find that your page is too far on all 4 ends, you can use those binder clips on all 4 edges. And the long metal part will help hold it down. And this tends to be kind of a wet and messy process, so I recommend putting down a vinyl tablecloth to help protect your surface. Now you need to set this somewhere so it can fully dry out. And on a humid night like tonight, it's probably best to allow it to dry overnight. All right, guys, so tonight I'm gonna try to get some more watercolor done. It is raining, so it is very humid outside and my pages may not actually dry. So we're gonna start off with a couple washes and sort of just see how that goes. And I have here my paints. I have here a palette with large wells, and this is just a recycled mochi ice cream container, so it's not anything fancy, and 2 cups of clean water. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill one of my palettes with the water and activate some of my pigments. And since it's sort of a later afternoon scene, I'm mixing in Indian yellow with orange. And for the other page, I really want to emphasize that it is much later afternoon. So I'm going to go with a little bit of Opera Rose with some Naphthol Red. And you have to be careful with Naphthol Red because this particular kind goes a long way. And some fuchsia. I think it's permanent mauve. And we're gonna take the brush we use to apply mops, use the mop brush we used to apply washes from the other day, and just go ahead and apply an all-over wash. And then, after all of it has been covered and there's no pooled areas of liquid, we want to prop it up. And it doesn't need to be propped up much, just a couple of inches. Ooh. Clean out the brush. And time to switch over to the other color. And when doing a wash, it's really better to maybe err on the side of caution and have your wash be a little too light and reapply it than to have it be way too dark and try to work around it. All right. So that is my first wash. I need to allow this to dry before I can continue. So I will see you guys when these layers have fully dried, which may take a while because it's kind of a damp night out there. All right, guys, it's been a couple of hours and my washes are mostly dry. They're still a little bit damp because it is so humid tonight. But I'm gonna go ahead and apply another layer because the colors aren't really where I want them to be. They're not as dark as I wanted. And in this one, I'm adding more orange. And if you live in damp or humid climates like Louisiana or Florida or parts of Alabama or parts of Georgia, it may just take you a lot longer to do watercolors than it may take your friends in other states. I don't have the drying time problems here. I mean, in Tennessee that I do here, but Tennessee is a lot drier. And I also don't paint on damp nights in Tennessee, whereas in Louisiana, there are a lot of damp nights. So these are factors you do need to take into consideration before you undertake any large format project like this. For those of you who live in these sort of humid, swampy areas, alcohol markers may give you the look you want without the long dry times, but it is going to cost you more. All right, so I've reapplied my washes to both, and I need to let these dry out before I can continue. So I'm going to go ahead and let that happen. So once your paper is fairly dry, and like I said, tonight is a really humid night, so that is just not going to happen, you may want to go ahead and knock in some preliminary shadows. Now with this purple shading, this purple wash, it's very easy for me to do that. And this may not be dark enough for right now, but it's going to tone and influence the paper, sort of giving the other colors a little bit of a cast. And it'll also help me remember areas of shading and stay consistent. And watercolor pages are especially multi-panel pages like these, are very similar to single panel or single unit illustrations. The real difference is you're just going to you have more to paint, and you're going to handle the panels in parts. Now, the way I do this is I work in batches. I'll color all of the skin. I'll color all of the floor. Basically, just trying to automate it as much as possible to save myself time down the road. I don't handle each individual panel as an illustration unless there's something very unique about that panel and what's going on in that panel that would give me reason to do that. And my regular viewers may recognize or may notice that I'm painting in a different environment. I'm actually out of town, so I've set up a temporary painting environment, and this was fairly easy to set up. There were a few things that I needed to bring, like my brushes and the paper. And there were a few things that I had sent here, like gator board, because it's easier than, trying to bring that in my carry-on bag. And then there are other things that I was able to pick up here. One of the things I did pick up here was a white vinyl tablecloth. Now, I wanted to go with white so that it wouldn't cast a color on the paper, influencing how the paper looks. But another aspect was it was very cheap. I picked it up over at Walmart. Some other things that I need to supply were the lighting in this house is very yellow. It's very warm, and that's very common in most non-artist houses. So I did need to pick up some bright white natural lighting, because that's what I'm used to painting with at home. I really do rely on that sort of lighting to be able to accurately find the colors I need. One of the plus sides, though, about it being as damp as it is that my paint stays workable for much longer than it would normally be active. So I can do blending techniques on this inexpensive watercolor paper that I might not otherwise be able to do because it would have already set up. So I'm softening some of the shadows on the face. And I'll set that over to the side and begin knocking in some of the preliminary shadows here using the same purple. And this is a very time-consuming process that does require a lot of patience. it is not necessarily the medium for everyone. And me showing you guys how I do this doesn't mean I feel like it is the medium for everyone. That said, I am an extremely impatient person. Patience has never been my virtue. I'm the sort of person who always wants things to hurry up and happen. So if I can find patience in watercolor, I fully believe you can too. It's really a matter of how badly you want it and how much willpower you have. And in one of my prior intro to comic craft videos where I show you guys how I handle the watercolor cover, I think I mentioned that I usually work on multiple pieces at one time. And 2 is definitely on the low end for me as to how many pieces I'm working on. Usually I would do 4, but I didn't actually bring enough bulldog clips here with me to do 4. And I believe I have some in storage here. So I need to go and get them later on this week. That is if I want to work on multiple pieces. Given how humid it's been, I'm definitely having difficulty with even 2. Paper has a memory, especially cellulose-based paper like what I'm using for these pages. And your watercolor pages will kind of, if you had trouble or encountered warping or didn't stretch your pages properly, your pages will revert to that state whenever you add a significant amount of water to the paper. So that's something you should keep in mind, is that paper has a memory. And that can definitely come back to bite you in terms of warping and where the paper pools. I mean, where the paper, where the water pools. One of the other downsides of painting while I'm out of town is I'm doing it very late in the evening. It's like 11 o'clock at night, and I've had a pretty busy day. So I may be a little bit fuzzy-headed when giving you guys instructions. I apologize for that. Please make sure you read the description and check the annotation, because I may, when editing this video, if I find that I said anything that was in error, I will correct it there. And I think just given how damp it is, because it's been raining almost all day here, I think I'm going to have to allow these pages to fully dry out overnight. When it is as humid as it is tonight, you also want to go over and not only sort of blend out or soften areas of where you put down shadow, but you also want to pick up any areas that may have pooled, because that can definitely be a problem later on. This page is looking very, very purple, possibly too purple, but I do want it to be a late afternoon page, and I think it's probably very difficult for you guys to actually see. I may have to switch to the hand cam for that. So let me do that, and I'll show you my progress for tonight before we call it an evening. Before I do that, I'll prop these up so they can dry, hopefully at an angle. All right, so that's what my pages look like right now. And the lighting isn't quite ideal. I do have 2 natural light lamps in here, but neither of them are overhead. I am trying to avoid cast shadow. Now, I recommend natural light lamps because it allows you to see colors as they actually appear, as they actually are, rather than, yellow or warm lighting influencing what you think the colors look like. Because I've had to do a lot of corrections in the past when I painted in that sort of light. So it is definitely worth investing in some natural light lamps, if only just to check. Now, you can see I've already laid down preliminary shading. And the purple stands out a lot more on the yellow tone page than it does on the violet tone page. But this is just shading to help remind me of areas that I want to shade more. So I'm going to allow this to dry overnight on this very damp night, and I will see you guys tomorrow with some more watercolor page progress. Alright guys, so it's had time to dry overnight. Today is the third day we've been working on these paintings, and the weather is still really humid outside, still really threatening rain, but I am going to try and persist. Now, I want to go ahead while I still have this yellow-orange mix from the other day. I want to go ahead and paint in the windows. And I'm also going to be mixing the tone that I use for the skin and the walls. It's sort of well, the walls are supposed to be like an off-white creamy color, and it's the base tone for the skin as well. Hopefully though, since it's not actively raining, we might not have quite the dry time problems. So to do that, we want to start out with about a dropper full of clean water. And we also want to go ahead and activate those pigments that are used for Caucasian skin tones. And I happen to really like yellow ochre and a little bit of scarlet red. And I'll take a few minutes for those pigments to activate. All right, so my pigments have had a chance to become activated. So now it's time to start mixing them. Now usually I would test my watercolors on a scrap piece of paper. Unfortunately, I'm kind of performing under unusual circumstances. So I'm just gonna have to go with the looks of it, at least with some of these colors. And this might be a little bit red. Now the areas which are a little too dark, like way over here, I'm just going to dab up some of that extra paint, including on Kara's face. I'd rather that be too light. And at this point in time, I'm not really concerned with designating the skin and the background to be different colors. I'm going to build the skin's color up over time, so it's going to look different from the environment. Working on pages in batch like this is really in fact, even larger batches, often 4 to 6 pages at a time, is really helpful because you mix up large batches of color and you just focus on blocking everything in at first. And this is particularly helpful when you've already figured out the color and feel for a scene, so you really just need to fill in areas of color. And it doesn't require a whole lot of thought until in parts of the page. Like when you're adding a lot of the shadow and the detail, batch painting like this can be really helpful, and it's the way I, in general, can manage to do watercolor comics is by working on so much at one time. Of course, if you have space limitations, like I do here, or materials limitations, it will affect how many pages you can paint at a time. Also, there are environmental factors, how long it takes your paper to dry, whether or not there are animals in your house who are destructive or would be prone to knocking over your setup. So in a house with no pets, you can leave your watercolor waters out all the time and not worry about an animal drinking them. But if you have cats, If you have cats, that is something you're gonna have to pick up because they will get into that, and a lot of watercolor pigments and paints are carcinogenic, so you know that's not really something you want your animal who doesn't know better getting into. Now, a watercolorist who considers themselves a fine artist or a fine art watercolorist, many of them really frowned upon using these sort of round palettes and pre-mixing large batches of color. But that's because they are working on one illustration at a time and they can mix colors as they need them very quickly. When you're working on multiple panels within a page, you're really working on multiple illustrations. So it does help not to have to mix the same color over and over again and hope for as much consistency as possible. When you pre-mix it, you're going to achieve a high degree of consistency because you're working from the same batch. So all of the panels on your page have the same skin tone, have the same look. So as I've said in a few of my other watercolor for illustration, watercolor for comics videos, the concerns of a fine artist watercolorist are not necessarily the same concerns as a comic or illustration watercolorist. Okay, so I've got the base coat applied and most of the colors I'm having a lot of trouble here with my particular pigments. I don't know if it's the humidity outside or I don't know. I don't normally have these problems in Nashville, so I can't really guess what it is. But I have the base coats down, so I will show you guys close up what I did. All right, so this is how it looks to me when I'm sitting here. And I basically filled in the walls and the first layer of skin. And since that takes up so much of the picture plane, I do need to give it ample time to dry. Now, there were certain areas where I had a lot of trouble with skin tone consistency, even though I pre-mixed the color. I am not 100% sure why that happened. It would require a lot of experimentation to troubleshoot it and try to fix it. If any of you are painters in southeast Louisiana below Lake Pontchartrain who paint during the hurricane season or during the rainy season and you have any advice for me on this other than buy a dehumidifier, please let me know, because this is something that's been an issue for sure while painting in the summer for me, and I'd love to solve the problem. Anyway, since it is such a humid day, I am going to need to step away for a significant amount of time to allow the paper to dry out. All right, so my paper has had a chance to dry and is still cool to the touch, which means it hasn't dried fully, but I could put another layer on top of it. And as I think I've mentioned earlier in this video, you need to be really careful with this. You can't do too many layers like that because it'll really come back to haunt you. But I think I can afford to do one more layer like that. All right, so I've got that second layer of skin tone on the walls and on the skin. And something I really struggled with is I forgot to bring my good larger round. This is a 10, this is a Squirrel 10 from Jerry's Artorama. This thing is literally like painting with a mop because the hair has zero resistance, so it flops over immediately, it bends over immediately. And it doesn't really have much of a belly either, so it doesn't really do a very good job of holding paint. You want to paint with the largest brush you can comfortably use, and unfortunately I just didn't bring a close second to that 10. And that 10 is so bad that I'm kind of tempted to go see if I can scrounge up a synthetic or just a replacement for it, because it is really making it that, combined with the humidity outside and my paints behaving in an unusual way, it's really making it difficult for me to paint. And I want to eliminate as many issues as I possibly can. So if replacing the brush solves some of these problems, then it's certainly worth it. And with your larger brushes, the ones that don't necessarily need to hold a lot of detail, you can switch over to a synthetic. In fact, I use a synthetic. This is another Jerry's Artorama brush. This is a Mimic, and it's a 26. I could not afford to buy a size 26 natural hair brush. That would be like $60. 60 definitely on up, probably up. This was like 24, way more affordable. I don't really need a natural hair brush in this size because my paintings are this size. They're much smaller. So I invested that money instead in buying good natural hair smaller brushes. So that if you do smaller illustrations like comic pages, you really do want to invest the majority of your money in small detail brushes and have one or two decent larger brushes. And this number 10 is just unreasonable. That needs to be replaced. So this needs to dry, and this will take longer to dry because I put a layer of really wet paint, really watered down paint on top of an already damp surface. So I need to step away for quite a long time to really allow it to dry out before I try to apply additional layers. And since it is not actively raining right now, the dry time is a little bit shorter and the paper doesn't buckle as badly. And I'm mentioning this because I know a lot of my viewers are from Louisiana as well. I meet a lot of you guys at cons. Hey guys. And you guys keep asking me your watercolor questions, and I really want to help you, and I really want to help troubleshoot these sort of problems. So while it may sound like I'm complaining, I'm acknowledging the issues that you've brought up to me, and hopefully we can figure out solutions to these. But I definitely think one of my problems here with the pigments I'm using, with the weather we've got, is this not very good brush. So I really may have to, that might be the solution for many of you guys, is just really upgrade your brushes or experiment around to find synthetics that work better for you, because humidity and barometric pressure really can play a huge role in how your watercolors handle. All right, so these pages have had time to dry, about 4 hours, and I can feel that they're a little bit warped. That's, you know how we talked about the memory of the paper. That's the memory of the paper. And I went out and I got a couple of other size 10 brushes. You can see not all size 10. These are all three of these are size 10 round. And you can see that not all size 10s are at, anywhere near the same size. I bought 2 synthetics. I think I've used the Princeton Neptune before. So I think I will go ahead and continue using it for this project. I also repositioned my lights a little bit, so hopefully the page is a little better lit for both me and for you guys. And this brush definitely feels easier to handle than the other one, and I took care in mixing my paint. So hopefully some of the problems I was having a little earlier today are taken care of, or they are in that list of things that I know I have to accommodate for. It's another important part of being a practicing artist is understanding your materials and the limitations they have and what outside factors will affect your ability to work. And the humidity factor is one of the reasons why I quit doing at-con watercolors. That's just something that's so far out of my control. I hate to promise something and then not be able to deliver it. Alright, so now I need to allow that layer to dry, and I can probably start moving towards a smaller brush, at least for the skin. Alright, so my skin tone has had time to dry. Now it's time to start mixing up some of the other colors. And one of the next colors I'm going to mix up is blush tone I use on Caucasian skin. And I use Algerian Crimson. I think it's a burnt orange and one of the Iridori Antique Browns. And I'll also go ahead and mix up the dominant hair color used. And both of these are going to be applied with brushes smaller than the 10 round. But we can use the 10 round to go ahead and add water to the palettes. And those are off camera, just by necessity of space. Alright, so I'm switching over now to one of my Kolinsky brushes, and this is a size 2 Creative Mark Rhapsody, and I really enjoy these in my studio. They're fairly high quality, and I feel like they're comparable to Winsor & Newton Series 7, but they don't cost nearly as much as Series 7. Blush is definitely one of those things I apply in batch, since there really isn't a whole lot of it. Also going to go ahead and start mixing up the color that I used for the floor. And it's a dark wood floor, so I need a dark brown. So I'm going to also go ahead and activate the colors I'm going to need. Okay, so it seems like the first layer of blush dried. I'm going to start working some areas a little darker than others. Build up that blush. What's interesting is a lot of this coloring is going to end up getting blended out as I add more layers of skin tone. But I definitely want it there because it'll influence the color underneath and give hopefully a little bit of a feeling of life to the pages. Gotta be careful, keep your sweaters from catching on your stretcher boards and binder clips. Don't want the whole thing going down with you. Doesn't really need to happen on camera. Of course, some areas are a little bit too dark, so we can use, that dripped. We can use a paper towel to pick some of that up. Blend some of that out. And once that's had a chance to dry, I'm gonna go ahead and render in the hair. But I think I probably can start laying in that floor. So at least the preliminary layer of floor. I mean, since there's so much of it, it's really important to get it down kind of early. That way it doesn't disrupt any other colors. And I'm back to using that 10 round by Neptune. It's one of the smaller 10 rounds that at least behaves the way a 10 round is supposed to behave. Still a little big, still a little hard to wield, but it'll definitely get the job done. And this floor color is not dark enough and it's not brown enough, but this is just a preliminary color. It's going to dry a lot lighter than this anyway, and it's just to start locking things in, so I can always mix it a little bit darker. And the real turning point for when a comic page starts looking done is when everything is blocked in. It starts to look more like what it's supposed to look like when it's finished. And for me, that's a big turning point in terms of how I feel about my progress. Once I've gotten everything blocked in, I feel a lot better about my progress. I'm excited to see where the page is going. I know what needs to be done. And even though I'm doing things in batches, I am going panel by panel and filling in color. Another thing to consider about comics, just in general, is that not every page is going to be a masterpiece. And sometimes the victory is just painting that decent page and then painting another decent page and then painting another one after that. I mean, really, when you think about comics or any sort of storytelling that's long form, you really want to think about the whole and how the whole ties together. And does that super beautiful spread actually serve the storytelling, or is it just a really attractive pinup? Although not all of the area of floors have fully dried, I'm going to start blocking in the first layer of hair, since there are no floor areas that are still wet that are directly adjacent to hair. So I figured while I'm waiting on that to dry, I might as well work on something else. Now, something I've been flirting with for over a year is purchasing a dehumidifier, because it does get so humid when I paint in Louisiana. It makes it very difficult to work, and it makes it impossible to work quickly. And I haven't really been able to find much information from other artists, particularly fine artists or watercolorists. That's the opinions I'm the most interested in, as to whether or not a dehumidifier has made a significant difference in their ability to paint. So if any of you happen to know firsthand if it's improved your ability to paint, I would appreciate it if you commented below. It would help me out a lot. Also adding some of the first layer for the brown hair, this sort of light brown color here. I'm also adding it to Kara's pet gecko, Dusty, to sort of help differentiate his color from hers. So before I put down too many more layers, I want to apply some shadow color I've blended, which is a mix of neutral tint, violet, and a little bit of Payne's Gray to the background areas that would be receiving less light. And I want to just apply it as sort of a overall wash to influence those colors. And this particular mixture is very common for my book 2 pages as a shadow kind of color. Now I need to warn you guys who also live in humid or wet areas that when it's humid like it is here today, you may think an area is dry and apply color on top of it, only to find that all of your paint smears because none of it had dried really. So when you're applying overall washes like this, you do need to be careful, because if you work it too much, it'll disturb the layers and it'll basically just all come up. Alright, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead, I think, and add some tone to the mirror to help it read more as a reflective device. And I think I'm also going to go ahead and add some shadow to these white areas. And I'm going to carry over that shadowy color over here. One of the nice things about painting pages in batches the way I do is that they often share a palette, which helps unify the pages of a chapter together. And I don't know how possible this would be if I only painted one at a time. definitely one of the reasons why I paint pages in batches of 4 to 6, because I try to paint an entire scene so that everything looks cohesive. Unfortunately, these are the last 2 pages of their scene. And I'll also go ahead and fill in the whites of eyes when applicable. Now there's some areas that are going to need heating up in the eyes. Let's see if I can do that. Might not be feasible. Okay. So I need to allow this to dry before I can continue. And there are some areas that are drier than others. So there is one other thing I think I can do. I need to double check against my reference, which is the pages I've previously painted. There's just not enough room here for me to show you what I'm doing, so you have to take my word for it. Alright, this is our reference. It's the other page in this scene. Move that out so I can see what I'm doing. It shows me that the pincushion is a bright red that I can go ahead and start working on. Except there are wet areas. So I'm going to turn this around for my convenience and start painting from this way. Normally, I really recommend against reaching this far to grab your colors. This is one of the reasons why I like to paint on the floor, because I can set things aside as I'm not using them. So please keep in mind that what I'm demonstrating as my layout or my setup in some of these videos is not really how I paint in real life. It's just, set up for the video, for the necessities of recording. So I'm also going to apply this shadow color here to the wall that has the window on it. And the reason for that is that when you've got a light source like a window, the wall the window is on is naturally blocked from receiving that light. Oh, I got red all over me. So it's going to be darker. The shadow color I mixed up will help tone this down, since they are technically complements. Alright, so I need to allow that to dry, and then I can resume my painting. And I also need to clean up that mess. Alright, so everything is all dry and ready for another layer. So I'm going to go back to the skin tone, which is evaporated some, although not really much since it is so humid outside. There's nowhere for that liquid to really go. Give it a good mix and then get on to painting. And it actually doesn't look like it's dark enough, so I'm gonna need to take a minute and mix it a little bit darker. All right. And I switched to a different brush. I switched to a synthetic because you don't want your good brushes getting beaten up, scrubbing pigments from the palette. Alright, so most of the skins are dry. I do need to let them fully dry before I can start applying freckles. There's a couple of things I could do. I can start painting Kara's shirt, or I can start painting her coveralls. Or I could apply another layer of brown to the floor. But I think I'm gonna let that wait until tomorrow. Hopefully that'll make things a little bit easier on me. And just like when I do marker illustrations, when I'm rendering in watercolor, freckles are, I try to make them different sizes, different shapes. So I usually do a few layers of freckles to sort of build them up into a believable collection. Alright, that's one set of freckles down. Now for the next page. Alright, both sets are finished. Now, her skin over here is looking a little bit too spotty rather than freckly. So I'm going to clean up that water that spilled and try to lift out some of those harsher freckles, at least on her face. And you want to do that with clean water. Right, that might be the best we're gonna get. And I think, at least for now, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to add the green on the strawberry pincushions. Basically, other than with the skin, what we're doing is the watercolor equivalent of flats. We're applying a coat of pretty much unshaded color to every section of the page. All right, almost done with that green. All right. So it's dry time. All right, let's put another coat on that floor. And I went ahead and I mixed the brown a bit darker. Hopefully it'll be dark enough. And it's not. What a pain in the booty. All right, well, I guess the solution to that is to go ahead and try to mix it even darker than what we already have. And I often have a problem mixing the floor dark enough, so this is not, oh shoot, this is not an unusual problem for me to have. It's just an annoying one because I am pretty much out of Van Dyke Brown, which is one of the main colors that I use for not only the floor, but for their hair. So I do need to try and reserve some Van Dyke Brown. However, I do have plenty of sepia, so hopefully that will sort of fill the gap. It's also difficult for me to gauge how actually dark these are without doing swatches. I should have purchased a little pack of Montval watercolor paper since that's what I'm painting on, and that would give me the most accurate idea of what I'm dealing with. But I did not. I just wasn't really thinking. And this time I'm using a size 4 brush since I do have finer details. I do need to be more controlled. I can't afford to do a lot of cleanup. Careful not to rest my hand in any cooled watercolor water. Definitely can be difficult. I am used to being able to rest my wrist for support. This is where having an illustrator's maul or a calligrapher's maul would be great because they're lower down than a regular maul. If you're not familiar with what a maul or a maul stick is or a bridge, they basically allow you to, they go over your work instead of resting on your work. And it's somewhere for you to put your weight if you're hovering the way I am, because this is not good for control. And I lose fine motor control very quickly. I was never adept at sports, so, you know, anything I can do to sort of keep control would be nice. That's going to have to be one of those things I invest in, but I can't really justify traveling with it since they do take up space and they do weigh something. And usually when I work when traveling, I can only bring my absolute essentials. right, so what we're gonna end up doing tomorrow is I'm going to selectively darken parts of the floor. This is a good base darkness for the floor. Now some areas are remaining white and remaining wet, and I wanna absorb some of that standing pigmented water, just dabbing it up with a brush, so that way we have sort of a more even distribution of color. That is one of the problems when the humidity is super high, is you will get areas of paper that dry faster than others, so you'll get more concentrated colors than others, because the way water and watercolors work is water flows from wet to damp. So dampened paper will pull more water. So if you've got standing water, it'll all sort of go towards one place, and that tends to also be the lower spots. And if your paper is driving at an uneven pace, it'll ripple. So, these are compounding problems, and some of them are mitigated by stretching the paper. But again, paper has memory. The night I stretched my paper, it was very humid, had a lot of buckling that I couldn't really do much about. Wasn't able to stretch the paper as quickly as would be ideal. That causes problems too. So we're gonna let this dry overnight before we make any more significant progress. That way we're not going to have areas that are still damp but may not look damp, may not even feel that damp, sucking color in from areas that are sopping wet. As I mentioned before, that can be an issue. I do have some splatter up there that I'm not happy with, so I'm gonna try and get rid of it, try to cover it, or wipe it away if I can. Sometimes Montball will let me do that, sometimes it won't, sometimes I just have to cover it. I'm having a really difficult time working at the setup I designed for myself here. I'm gonna have to continue tweaking it if I wanna be able to work while I'm embooling. I'll show you guys what I'm working with. For some of you guys, this might seem like a really ideal situation, and if you're working on smaller projects or one page at a time, it's really not bad. It's when you're working on multiples and you have multiple palettes spread out, it quickly becomes an issue. And a lot of that is my own fault, the way I laid everything out. The way I have the camera set up, I didn't bring another tripod, so I have it on a box, on a mini tripod on the table. So I know you guys are having trouble seeing the things I'm doing, which is why I've been taking the time to, pause the video, bring the camera around, and restart it so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. I do have step-by-step watercolor tutorials on the channel that I recommend you check out if you want to learn how to watercolor, especially if you want to learn to watercolor the way I do. For right now, we're just doing basically fills. And those don't really require a lot of technique. They just require a lot of patience and the ability to work fairly quickly. So I'm not super concerned about that. I would like to change my camera angle when I'm doing more detail work. I also realized that I forgot my color pencils and my watercolor pencils. Those are in Nashville, and I probably will need them because I'm having a lot of difficulty, given the weather outside, I'm having a lot of difficulty attaining the detail I like to achieve. I'm also having a lot of trouble controlling the water and controlling the color, so I will have to do a lot of cleanup work, a lot of tightening up with color pencils, watercolor pencils, and I'm debating whether I want to just get like a cheap set of Crayolas, because I only really need a few colors and they don't really need to do anything that spectacular. Just getting maybe a cheap set of Crayolas to sort of help me out in my time of need. But I have a few days to think about that, since the weather is kind of preventing me from painting great swaths. That can be a good problem in a way, because it gives you a lot of time to think about how you want to solve your problem, so you're not immediately forced into a solution. So I am going to pause the video and bring the camera around, show you guys what I've done. Okay, so this is my current painting setup. It's the dining room table. I'm sharing it with my mom as she repairs a clock. So that is taking up some of the table there. Usually I paint on the floor with everything spread around me, and when I finish pages or when I finish working on a particular part of a page, I'll put it, you know, sort of within reach, but not in my direct vicinity. With a table, though, I can really only work on 2 pages at a time. Because 4 pages would literally take up the whole table. And you guys can see my palettes are not as effectively laid out as they could be. I'm going to have to rethink that, because it's just, I'm like really reaching when I'm trying to get colors, and you really don't want to be stretching that far over your papers. So if you guys can learn from my mistakes, that would be fantastic. I know many of you guys are younger, you're just starting out, so hopefully this is a good time to not start bad habits. So this is today's progress. We've applied skin tones, first layer of hair, the floors, the walls, started filling in some things. So even though progress has been kind of slow in general, I'm happy with what was done today. Let me show you guys the lighting situation here. I have 2 OT lights to try and remedy the very warm lighting in here. And that's another thing, if you're a watercolor artist, or if you're an artist who relies on being able to accurately gauge color, you really need to invest in either switching out your yellow home lights. I know the yellow light is better if you're like trying to go to sleep at night. These white lights will actually keep you up all night. That was a problem I dealt with last year. So the yellow lights are actually better for you if you trying to go to sleep like a normal human. The white lights are supposed to be better for seasonal affective disorder, but still kicks my butt every year, despite all of the lights in my apartment being natural lights. But yeah, this is what I'm working with right now. And there's a $1 plastic tablecloth on the table, and that's actually been great because I didn't realize how messy it was until I had a white tablecloth to show me all my drips. So I'm glad that's there to catch a lot of my problems. That shredder box, the camera has been standing in front of that shredder box, like in front of the OT light on that shredder box. So I need to bring a real tripod next time, because this is on like a tiny iPhone tripod, even though this is a camcorder. So yeah, this is what I'm painting with for right now. I think that's it for tonight. I've been doing a lot of my painting in the evening, so if I'm kind of quiet, it's because I'm brain dead. And I guess better quiet than having to edit a lot of not important chatter out. Anyway, that's today's progress, and that's, the layout I'm working with. Like I said, if I was working on a single page at a time or smaller illustrations, this would be fine. This would be great. I'm used to like batch producing a lot of my paintings, which requires a massive amount of space. So, gotta change your methods when you change your environment. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to point that right in the light. All right, so I'll see you guys tomorrow. All right, guys, let's get painting today. It's been so wet that I haven't been able to make the sort of progress I would like. So I'm hoping to make that up today, since it isn't actually raining. It's one of the less humid days we've had this week. Gonna go ahead and activate the colors I know I'm gonna want to use with, just an eyedropper of water. Also going to go ahead and darken certain areas of the floor. So when it comes to ultramarine blue, I've had bad experiences where the pigments will sort of settle to the bottom of the pan, leaving the color sort of muddy and muted, not nearly as pretty as ultramarine can be. So what I found helps is if I just mix it as I go. So one of the really important things when you're doing a long form watercolor comic is consistency. And I'll often refer to volume 1 for color accuracy, especially for things that only appeared one time. So this mirror over here is sort of a hot pink color. I think I was going for Caboodle's pink. So while I'm here, I figured I would introduce you guys to my family's cat, Remy. She came into the room to come see what I was doing. And so I thought I would introduce you guys. She is the cat I got my junior year in high school, so she's getting a little older. And she's a short-haired American Manx, you can't see. And she's mostly outdoor, although she's worming her way inside. So, all right, there you go, Rem. Since she keeps popping in to see what I'm doing, I figured you guys might get a kick out of seeing her, since I think you've seen Bowie in my other painting video when I was doing comic pages. So right now I am mixing up the color that goes on the rug, sofa, and chair in Kara's family living room. And it's sort of a light indigo color. Hard for me to tell until I put it down. And you guys can see the more the pages get blocked in, the closer they look to being finished. And this can be a little bit deceptive because it often feels like you're closer to being done than you really are. Those of you who watched my the cover video where I was painting Naomi sitting on her porch can testify that I said I was about finished so many times when really I wasn't. Of course, when you get to the point where you're adding fine details, it really does feel like it's moving faster and it feels like you've hit a turning point, particularly because you can often work non-stop when you're still blocking in things, you're dealing with adjacent shapes that can bleed into each other. And honestly, painting in the fine details feels more like actual watercolor painting than when you're blocking in shapes, at least to me, because I mean, when I'm blocking in like this, anybody can do it. I could have somebody else, you know, come and work from my reference and be able to block everything in for me. But where you could tell it's my work is how I handle the details. And it's very tempting to render certain things all the way to completion. But, you know, you do need to try and work at a steady pace, filling all things in. I mean, I'm not so good about that either. I mean, I put a lot of detail into Dusty Kara's pet gecko, who she's holding up right here, and I'm still blocking in a lot of shapes. right, guys, I think we are finished for tonight. I'm gonna let this dry overnight, but first I'm going to take you guys over to take a look at what we did. So we're still mostly in the blocking in phase, although it's quickly coming to an end. As you can see, there are increasingly fewer areas of just plain white. Today we blocked in Kara's clothing, her mother Maldina's clothing, the frame for the mirror. We darkened the floor. We also blocked in the sofa and the rug. So I think we're making pretty decent progress. Hopefully we can keep up this pace, maybe even extend this pace tomorrow. So I will see you guys then. So today I mostly just focused on shading things, deepening color, adding slight details. Tomorrow I'm going to start adding actual complementary color shading for skin tone in the background. You want to add those sort of glazes before you add too much detail, because they can reactivate the fine details and make it look muddy. So you want to add those afterwards. Alright, so we're finally at the point where I can start adding some of the shadow to the characters in these two pages. And to do that, I'm mixing up some red violet, some shadow violet, and some naphthol red, with maybe a little bit of fuchsia. When mixed up properly, it's a really good contrasting color for skin. Unfortunately, it seems like I mixed this batch a little too thin, so I'm gonna have to let that dry and mix it a little bit darker. Alright, let's give the shadow tone a second try. Alright, this is a little bit better, but it's still not really dark enough. You don't want to go over this too many times, because it'll really make your image look muddy if you go over it too many times. No, that's what I'm doing, see? Alright, here you go. Alright, so I need to mix that skin tone shade a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. So a lot. The red violet. And I need to let that dry before I can apply that next layer. Alright, so that first layer has dried. Now it's time to tighten that up. Hi guys, it's been a few days since I was last able to work on my watercolors. I've been out of town, so they've had plenty of time to dry. Right now, Luling is just as damp as it was when I left, so I'm not super sure that dry times are going to be very reasonable. If you do work in a humid climate, you are going to have to give your watercolors more time. So I'm definitely sympathetic to my other friends in Louisiana who are trying to learn how to watercolor. The environment does set up a lot of new obstacles that even when I was in Georgia or in Tennessee, I just don't necessarily face. And there are things you can do about that, although I'm not sure how effective those things really are because I haven't had a chance to test them yet. So my pages have had time to dry. Like I said, for a few days because I was out of town. And before I left, I went and I picked up some colored pencils that I needed. I had forgotten to bring my big set. It wouldn't have been very feasible anyway, so I pretty much just picked up the essentials I knew would work well for these pages. Some browns, some peaches. I also picked up some intense watercolor pencils. If you guys aren't familiar with intense watercolor pencils, these are my favorite on the market. They're technically not watercolor pencils at all. They're really water activated ink pencils. That means once you've added water to them, they're indelible. They'll never lift up again, which is why they're not true watercolors. And a little bit earlier, I went ahead and I reactivated the palettes I was going to need, or the colors rather, that I was going to need for what I have left to do. Hopefully I can get a lot of that knocked out tonight. That really, again, depends on how quickly things dry. And I have, I know the lighting may look a little bit weird to you guys. I have 3 natural light lamps lit right now, trying to get full coverage. Ideally, you would have a natural light bulb in your ceiling. It's a warm yellow right in here, and there's not much I can do about that. So it is a little bit hard to get as much coverage as I might like in terms of color. Like, light coverage, whatever. So I'm pretty much on the stage where I'm adding some of my final details. Previously, I did the shading on the skin. Now I'm working on building up the hair. And the reason I wait to do that, especially with darker hair colors, is these are some of the colors I use for Kara and her mother's hair are kind of opaque, and they're very prone to influencing the other colors around them. They're prone to spreading, they're prone to bleeding if any water gets near them. So I was really trying to do damage control by holding them off until the end, because my traditional way of adding shadows to most colors doesn't really work in the hair anyway. So this was something that could wait until the end. I was hoping my other tripod would come in, and we did hold the mail here, so it may be waiting for me at UPS right now, but I really do need to get these pages finished and off the table because I do have other projects I need to work on before I head out. So I can't really wait for that tripod any longer. But what I was hoping to do with that was set it up behind me, sort of like the setup I had for the cover tutorial, so that you guys could get a different vantage point. So now that I have that layer of hair painted, it's time for me to mix up another one of my shadow colors. Now these over here, these have dried for a few days, so I might be able to reactivate them, but I don't want to have to count on it. I will try though, because I mean, you know, I don't want to waste it. And I already went over, you guys, what goes into that. It's an indigo, a shadow violet, Payne's gray, usually a bit of purple to add some warmth. But the hair needs to be fully dry before I can really start applying it. And when I'm going to apply this shadow color, I'm really going to work in sections, because what works on one area may not be dark enough for another area. So I am going to allow the paint on the hair to dry, and I'll check back in with you guys. All right, guys, so the hair's finally dried, or at least it's dried enough for what I need to do. And for the blue that I used for Kara's mother's dress, I needed to mix up a special color, because this sort of ultramarine or cerulean blue, it's actually a mixture of two different blues. The pigment lifts up if you apply a color on top of it. It'll wash away, even if you're using a very soft brush. So you really, for me, I found that by using a color that has some of it in it already, it's less prone to doing that. And I'm trying, I don't know how successful this is going to be, but at least for right this moment, I'm trying to record and paint. So I'm holding the camera in my hands right now to demonstrate. Okay, so, okay, there's that, and this is not like, you know, a primo painting job. This is me trying to get it to work. So I'm gonna let that dry, and I'm gonna apply that to all over her dress, and then I'm gonna see how that looks, and if I need to mix it darker, if I need to apply another color over it. There's going to be a part where I'm gonna have to, if I want to darken her dress anymore, add any more shadows, I'm going to have to switch over to pencil color, because I don't want to disturb the pigment too much. So my paint isn't entirely dry. There are a few spots that are still damp, but it's dry enough that I can start making progress elsewhere. So I'm going to go back to that shadow color I mixed up previously. Oh, but you know what? I need to darken up that pillow a bit.
All right, these pages are just about done. All that's really left is to remove them from these stretcher boards. I went ahead and I added details with some color pencils. I used Prismacolors on these pages and some white Winsor & Newton gouache, and that helps put highlights in the eyes. It is a little bit difficult to see, but it helps to put highlights on the eyes and add highlights back into the background. So I am going to let the gouache that's kind of piled up on the side dry, and when that's finished, I'll remove these from their boards, and these pages will be finished, at least for now. Okay, so all that's really left is to remove the blue tape from the watercolor paper and the paper from the stretcher boards. And to do that, you want to pull away at a 90-degree angle, because you might get some tearing, and that's fine, but you don't want it tearing into your page. See what I mean about some, oh, you can't see. See what I mean about some tearing? All right, so this is how the pages look once they've been removed from their backer boards and their blue paint. What was less striking when the blue was on there is this border of pink. That was the pink wash, and when you can see it against the white of the page, it stands out a lot more. So I will see you guys again soon with, when we're doing the borders with color pencil. And then I'll check in with you guys for digitization and lettering. I'm Becca Hilburn. I hope you guys enjoyed these tutorials. I hope it was helpful to you. As always, if you have a question, please let me know in the comments below. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to check out my other videos in my Intro to Comic Craft series. I go over thumbnailing, I go over roughs, I go over painting a cover. And for more content like this, please check out my blog, nattosoup.blogspot.com. If you're interested in helping make more content like this possible, there are a number of ways you can do that. You can share my videos to your social networks so your friends can also learn. You can go ahead and subscribe to my channel for more content like this, or you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/nattosoup for information on how to help fund more videos like this. So I will see you guys soon. I hope you have a great day. Bye!